This is Matthew Siegel's first space. I've coerced him to do one of these because it's about time. And we will start actually it's 8 o'clock, so I'll just introduce Matthew right now. So Matthew Siegel has been a YouTuber for, I think, 10 or more years. You can scroll through his channel and see some wonderful videos of him engaging in philosophical thoughts, from things like German idealism to Rudolf Steiner to Whitehead to Liz Guattari. But he's also a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And last year he wrote a brilliant book called Physics of the World Soul, Whitehead's Adventure in Cosmology. And it is my great honor to introduce him to everybody here, and for him to kind of let us into the world of process metaphysics. So I guess what I'm going to ask Matt right now is, can you describe what process metaphysics is? How does it differ from other types of philosophy? And how did you come into process metaphysics?
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you encouraging me to try this out. It's really exciting to see the response and the interest. And thanks for your kind introduction. I'm curious to hear what you think metaphysics is, but I'll answer first. Process metaphysics in particular has become a love of mine, and I guess continues to become a love of mine. It seems to deepen day by day, and it started, I guess, probably in high school when I hope we all sort of start to gain the ability to think for ourselves, and that's kind of a cliche, like think for yourself. But in a philosophical sense, it's actually, it's not that easy to do, to really think. And when you do begin to think, it seems to be, what makes it genuine thinking is that it's stemming from a desire to know. And you could say it's also a kind of response to wonder. And here I'm parroting Aristotle, of course. Philosophy begins in wonder. Metaphysics is about the desire to know. But I think it's an indication that you're doing genuine thinking when those are the sort of motivating factors, right? So there's that's why philosophy is called the love of wisdom, philosophia, because there's an eros to it, right? There's a desire at the root of it. And I think one of the ways we know that we're doing metaphysics well, and I do think we need to think of it as a practice. It's not just theory, or if it is theory, then theory is not just theory. Theory is also a kind of contemplative practice, right? We know that we're doing it well when it never ends and we don't expect it to. The metaphysicians you want to worry about are the ones who think they've figured it out. They have the final answers. They have the set of categories beyond which there shall be no more. That's when that desire to know has been lost, and one has claimed to have become wise, and that's problematic. So that's not metaphysics. Or those who, I guess someone like Heidegger might want to use metaphysics in a way that almost from the get-go has this negative connotation. We want to not do metaphysics anymore, right? Because that's a dead end. But I think we can do metaphysics in a processual way and avoid some of the pitfalls that thinkers like Heidegger were worried about. We can still call what we're doing metaphysics. So I'm kind of, I guess, obsessed with this process of following the trail of, wonder, and just asking the questions that seem most meaningful to me. And I'm lucky enough that I get to do that for a living. And so let me pause there, Chris, and see where you'd like to go from here. Because, I have more to say, but I think, as Heraclitus said, knowing not how to listen, they know not how to speak. So I'd love to hear, what you think metaphysics is, and what inspires you to philosophize.
Well, one thing that I forgot to tell everybody that are listening right now that I had written down, I was kind of thrown off because I had written out an introduction for Matt. Matt is a philosopher that engages with scientists. So if you go through the last 2 years of his YouTube videos, he's actually engaging with physicists, biologists, chemists, all theists. And so he's not just one of these philosophers that, is just simply passionate about metaphysics. He wants to extend metaphysics into a broader theory of how we can understand the world, metaphysically speaking. And so it's not just a kind of rationalistic metaphysics. This is something that I really admire about him. I believe he defines his position as pan-experientialism. And you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not all up on the whole process philosophy as much as Matt is. But for me, metaphysics, for a long time I thought it was just metaphysics, like that which goes beyond the physical world. But the more that I started reading the German idealists, I realized that, and especially Schelling and Hans Jonas and some other thinkers, Lorenz Aachen, I realized that when it comes to phenomena, there really is two worlds. There's the world of the real, which is, if we think of a leaf, we can see its greenness, its texture, its magnitude. But then there's also the world of the ideal, the kind of forces and intensities that are underneath, that lie beneath this leaf. And this is a really bad example, but what I'm trying to show here is that there's more than meets the eye here. That there's a kind of dynamic bond between humans and nature, and that they're both interwoven, and that we've had this privileged position of thinking that we are as sentient creatures, we are the top of the food chain, the kind of medieval great chain of being, but really this is not true. Everything is a part of a kind of integral space that's, and we could say that every living being are almost like monads, or like actants for me. But for me, metaphysics is philosophizing in a speculative manner about reality, being, and this kind of ideal aspect that lies beneath phenomena.
So, thank you, Chris. You said one of the things you were saying, asking if I would agree to the characterization, was that I identify with pan-experientialist sort of vision of reality, and I think, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think I'm always a little hesitant to overly identify with an ism for the reasons I laid out earlier, as though it were some final destination. But we name our positions, and we debate and hopefully dialogue with one another about which position conforms best with the available evidence. And you're right also that I love to engage with scientists, because I think you defined metaphysics in perfectly appropriate, interesting, insightful way as sort of that which is beyond physics. I think that's how you put it, beyond physics. And just at the end of your comments, we're referring to something ideal which kind of lies beneath the surface. There's a very storied tradition and powerful lineage of thought that engages with metaphysics in that way. But I think there's another way, right, where metaphysics really just means after physics. And so, Aristotle and his Metaphysics, I think the title was actually coined by his students, and it just happened that he gave these lectures after physics. But in this text named Metaphysics of Aristotle's, he also says that, like, you only want to really do metaphysics at the end, even though it's the metaphysics is kind of the science of the first things, of the starting points, or the premises, right? It's really the first principles that you're investigating in metaphysics. Nonetheless, you can't really do it until the end, until you've already done, you've arrived at more or less adequate understandings of all the special sciences. And so I think for me, maybe I'm pretty traditional and Aristotelian in the sense that it's really important to be to be aware of the evidence, right? The empirical findings of all the special sciences, all the different modes of engagement that human beings cultivate when relating to the natural world. And so one of the things that's interesting about process metaphysics in particular is that, at least as it began to be really systematized by Whitehead in the 20th century, is that it was largely a response to some of the revolutions in physics, quantum and relativity theory. I mean, this is certainly true for Whitehead. Certainly, process metaphysics, you could say, goes all the way back to Heraclitus. Chris and I probably will eventually start talking about whether or not Schelling is a process philosopher. I think he kind of is. I want to put him in that lineage. But nonetheless, it's really 20th century physics, the dissolution of absolute time and space, the dissolution of substantial matter into energy, right, or into vibratory events, right? So nowadays, in light of modern physics, you kind of have to say that nature is made of events. It's not made of, physicists still talk about particles, but what they really mean is a vibration in a field. It's a happening, And so for Whitehead, process metaphysics comes after 20th century physics in an important sense. What do you think? What do you think, Chris? How does that land for you?
I think that's wonderful. Just for some of the listeners that are not familiar with Whitehead, would you mind just giving a kind of brief outline who Whitehead was, where when he was living, maybe some of his background?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I also just want to say that process metaphysics can be much broader than just Whitehead. But I know a lot of people are interested in him. I'm certainly interested in him. But I don't want it to seem like, he has the monopoly on what we would call process metaphysics. But, he's a British national, born in Ramsgate. He went to Cambridge to study mathematics and Trinity College, and taught there as a mathematician in the 1880s. And eventually, one of his top students, Bertrand Russell, and Whitehead wrote the famous Principia Mathematica, trying to ground math, arithmetic in particular, in logic. They didn't succeed, but they birthed a whole new method of sort of symbolic logic and approaching deep philosophical problems. You could say analytic philosophy kind of sprouts out of their attempt to ground math in logic with Principia. A lot of paradoxes emerged, right? Later, Gödel would formalize some of these paradoxes, and Russell kind of wanted to make the Principia project work, but right around, just after the Principia was published, I think the last volume 3, was 1913. Just after that, right, Einstein starts to gain more attention and fame because of his theories of relativity. Quantum theory is beginning to develop. And Whitehead, who studied Maxwell's theory and equations of electromagnetism, and he was a mathematician, but really a mathematical physicist as well. He was one of the few who could understand Einstein in these early days. And it was these revolutions in physics that made Whitehead realize that the old mechanistic understanding of nature was entirely inadequate. Maxwell's electromagnetic theory was already kind of if not directly challenging the Newtonian Cartesian view, at least suggesting that there was more yet to be discovered about the nature of nature. But once relativity and quantum theory, inaugurated this complete paradigm shift in physical science, Whitehead realized that science needed a new metaphysics, and so beginning in 1919, he started publishing books on natural philosophy or philosophy of science. Principles of Natural Knowledge came out in 1919, engaging deeply with Einstein. In 1920, he published a book called The Concept of Nature, which is where he famously he frames the famous bifurcation of nature as a problem that he wants to resolve, bringing quantity and quality, bringing the way that physicists would measure wavelengths of light back together with the redness and the beauty of a sunset. He wanted these two visions of the universe to hang together. And then 1922, the principle of relativity is actually an alternative rendering of Einstein's tensor equations, trying to develop a relativistic understanding of gravitation that wouldn't require curved space. A lot of interesting metaphysical details there that we'd have to have a whole spaces session to even scratch the surface about. So these are his early sort of forays into philosophy, definitely philosophy of science and even mathematical physics and philosophy of physics. And then after this, he's invited to come to America to teach at Harvard. And, he's already had this long career as a mathematician and physicist. And he comes to Harvard in 1924 and is in the philosophy department there, right? And he says in his first lecture to his students at Harvard that this is actually his first philosophy course. He's never actually formally studied philosophy. I mean, he's definitely, when he was a student at Cambridge, he was reading the Critique of Pure Reason and memorized large sections of it by heart and was a deep student of Plato and Aristotle and many of the modern philosophers, early modern thinkers. And so just because he didn't have a formal education in philosophy doesn't mean he wasn't a student of the tradition, but he wasn't formally trained. And so in some ways he was an undisciplined philosopher who could think the history of philosophy in a fresh way, and he does that in Science and the Modern World, the book that came out in 1925, and then his Gifford lectures named Process and Reality, that was published in 1929. That's where he really lays out his whole metaphysical scheme, his new table of categories, or as he calls it, a categorical scheme. And then 1933, Adventures of Ideas is published. In 1938, Modes of Thought. He retired from Harvard actually in 1937. He had a few more essays, one titled Mathematics and the Good on Platonism and another on immortality that he wrote late in his life. And he dies in 1947 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And, so that's kind of his trajectory. And, for the last, for most of the second half of the 20th century, his work was kept alive by process theologians. And only more recently, in the last couple of decades, has there just, I think, been what we have to call a Whitehead Renaissance, where across all sorts of different disciplines, including philosophy, but others as well, in the sciences and in the arts, Whitehead's work is being looked at again. The ecological crisis, I think, is one of the major motivating factors here, because he did his metaphysics. He called it also not just process philosophy, but a philosophy of organism or organic realism, right? And so it's a very ecological philosophy already 100 years ago that more and more people, scholars, practitioners are finding relevant to the challenges that we're facing today. So that's Alfie for you.
What I really liked about what you just said is this idea of a philosophy of organism. Because in a sense, the Enlightenment or Enlightenment philosophy was a wonderful thing, but at the same time, at the expense of nature and at the expense of the organic world, we lost this kind of our interwoven fabric with the world. And as Kengeham says, and I like this, that as new technology was created, we started seeing the world as the new object, like the new created object. This is why we have Descartes thinking of the cosmos as a big gigantic clock with springs that, you know what I mean? In the most atomistic way of thinking of the universe is not organic. It's understood in parts. And I like this idea of a philosophy of organism, or an ontology, or an organic kind of realism, and this idea of events. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about, and then maybe after that, after this one part, we can open up the floor and maybe ask some, if there's some questions, we can speak to some other people. I was just wondering, how would you explain these events? Like, what did you mean by this idea of, seeing things as events?
Yeah. So, it's easier to understand what an event ontology would be to contrast it with a substance ontology, or an ontology that's built up of particles or parts. Events, the thing about events is they're neither parts nor wholes, at least in the way that Whitehead describes them. And so rather than a universe that is composed out of parts that would add up to a whole maybe, but that in and of themselves are only accidentally related to one another, and only, in other words, have external relationships with one another, in an event ontology or a process ontology, the entities, which again, they're events, but they're still entities, they're all internally related to one another. So rather than being separate substances, and for Aristotle, as much as for Descartes, a substance is defined as that which requires nothing but itself in order to exist, right? In order to be what it is, it requires nothing else. In Whitehead's ontology of events or processes, or he calls them actual occasions in Process and Reality, in his ontology of occasions, each occasion requires all of its relationships to be what it is. It's not reducible to all the other occasions. It's not reducible to its relationships. In other words, there's always something new added in each event that allows it to transcend its own past. But nonetheless, all of the material that goes into the emergence of a new event it's the past universe, right? And for Whitehead, each actual occasion of experience as it arises is inheriting the entirety of the universe up to that point, and not just repeating everything which has happened or summing it up, but in some way transcending it by adding a novel form of subjective immediacy, right? And so what I'm beginning to describe here is Whitehead's key category of concrescence. Concrescence is the process whereby the many objects of the past grow together to form a novel subject in the present. And the experience achieved in the present, subjective immediacy, you could call it, is a novel perspective on everything which has occurred before it. But as soon as that perspective is achieved, as soon as experience reaches this satisfaction of a novel perspective on the whole universe before it, it perishes, Whitehead says, and passes into, right, subjective immediacy passes into what he calls objective immortality. He also calls this the superject, right? So the subject that emerges out of the many objects achieves this unity of perspective, perishes, and becomes a superject, which is then one of the many objects that can be an ingredient in the next round of concrescence. And so in an event ontology, the universe is made new again in each moment. Even though there's a repetition occurring, it's a repetition with a difference. And the amount of difference ingredient in each event depends on the complexity of the environment in which that event occurs. And so evolution is the process of sort of accruing more and more complex environments such that the events which occur within them are capable of realizing more difference, or you could say are capable of more creativity in each moment. Another way of thinking about what that difference or more creativity would be is, in Whitehead's terms, it's about the amount of possibility that can be ingressed. I'm using his lingo here. The amount of possibility that can be ingressed into a given occasion of experience, into a novel event, determines how intense the experience realized will be, how much creativity will be present. And so, in Whitehead's view, the universe is this creative advance into novelty. It's a process of emergent evolution at every step of the way. What's emerging, though, is more complexity, not ever some people will talk about conscious experience as being an emergent product of the brain or complex physiology. And for Whitehead, experience, this is the pan-experientialist part, is present from the get-go. You don't have an event unless you have experience, unless you have some form of subjectivity, right? And there's a whole panoply, a spectrum of subjectivity in nature, and humans like to think of themselves at the top of a hierarchy, but we could be actually somewhere in the middle. We really don't know. There are mystical traditions which would offer more information about where we are in the hierarchy, but I think this is a little taste of the sort of process, relational, and experiential ontology that Whitehead offers us.
Oh, thank you for that. That was very deep and very articulate, well articulated, actually. It's funny too because you and I have the first time we really discussed process philosophy was in relation to Schelling, in relation to your dissertation, right? Your dissertation was a reading of I think not just Whitehead and Schelling, but there are others, but seeing Schelling as a part of this relation of process thinkers, I think from Heraclitus all the way up to even Whitehead, and even there's more. You have other thinkers in that canon. But I was thinking as you were talking about, I'm going to just get to Schelling for a second, and I'm sorry. Everyone's going to have to just deal for 1 second. This idea that nature emerges from the unconditioned, and that creativity is this kind of spontaneous inhibition that Schelling calls, that form little whirlpools out of this absolute productivity that is almost like a flowing river, he says. And we both, this passage both means a lot to us. And that it's not that once this product is away from this productivity, it's separated. No. I like giving the example of an evergreen tree dropping a pine cone, dropping a seed, and it's kind of like they are co-eternal in the sense that their identity is linked. But they're now differentiated. There's now a difference, a freedom to the product now. I like this idea, and I think in this sense, and even Schelling even calls this process. He'll talk about it as a process, and I see it. I believe he calls it dynamic atomism, and I think he's playing on the words there. But I like this idea that that creativity isn't just this. Creativity isn't just some thing that's in human beings. Creativity is this kind of raw. I don't want to say animating principle. I guess we could say that in a la Bergson. But I like this idea. What makes you think that Schelling is a process philosopher?
Well, yeah. I just want to really amplify what you said first about creativity not just being a human possession. I mean, step one is recognizing creativity when we partake in it possesses us. Like, we never get to tell creativity what to do. but more than that, it's not just a human capacity that we are sometimes sort of graced by. It's cosmic. It's present throughout the universe at the physical, the chemical, the biological levels, if you want. And so when we grant that, when we recognize that, I think it changes everything. I mean, that's like it changes everything from our theology to our physics to our anthropology, right? Because all of a sudden human beings aren't alone in the universe anymore, right? There's creativity everywhere. And if the pan-experientialists are right, there's agency and feeling and value everywhere, right? So it's like the problem's not that there's no meaning in the universe, it's that there's too damn much. And it's a pluriverse, really, of different meanings and purposes and desires. And so if there's a challenge here, it's how do we continue to live enriching lives in the context of this democracy of fellow creatures, creative creatures, though self-creating creatures, which is a bit of a paradox there. But for Whitehead, the divine is fully the divine isn't outside the universe, right? And here we can start to connect to Schelling a little bit here. I think Whitehead and Schelling are both pan-entheists, right, who see the universe as, in some sense, inside of God, and also see God as, in some sense, inside of the universe. And as I was saying just a moment ago, each creature is a sort of microcosmic reincarnation of the divine. And rather than see God as this all-powerful, all-controlling being beyond the world, the power that the divine has is manifest through creatures and given expression by love, right? By our capacity for love, by our capacity for creativity. And so we shouldn't look elsewhere for the divine. If God is real, it's a feature of our experience, right? And I think this points to Schelling's later work in particular on positive philosophy, really trying to approach the empirical, the experiential in a new way, granting what he calls the unprethinkable, that will forever contextualize reason. There's so many great lines by Schelling about the way that this abyssal creative groundlessness sort of encompasses all of our thinking. It's unprethinkable. It's a prioriable, right? And so Schelling, I think, in his understanding of the importance of time, really does get us very close to some of Whitehead's ideas. You mentioned that whirlpool quote. Let me actually read that for folks, just in case they've managed to not hear this from Schelling's. I think it's from the 1797 Ideas for a Philosophy of Nature, or is it later?
No. I think it's from the first. It's from the first outline.
Okay, first outline of a Philosophy of Nature. So it reads. Schelling writes, "A stream flows in a straight line forward as long as it encounters no resistance. Where there is resistance, a whirlpool forms. Every original product of nature is such a whirlpool, every organism. The whirlpool is not something immobilized. It is, rather, something constantly transforming, but reproduced anew at each moment. Thus, no product in nature is fixed, but it is reproduced at each instant through the force of nature entire." That very easily could have been Whitehead describing the process of concrescence. So I think they are kindred thinkers and process philosophers.
Yeah, the first real book that I read by Whitehead, it was actually The Concept of Nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that book struck me as a beautiful text, especially when he starts describing the events of how well, the first couple pages of the text are him critiquing concepts of nature that have reduced it to just pure brute materialism, and then he kind of unravels this, what we've been talking about. I wanted to open up the floor if there are any questions for Matt, sorry. So if you have a question, just use the button that looks like a heart and a plus and raise your hand, and we can unmute you and you can ask a question. If there are no questions, then we'll just continue to geek out here. We're used to doing this. But I'd really like to hear some thoughts, ideas, even if you just if this is, challenging maybe your own set of ideas, or maybe it's making you think, maybe it's opening your mind to seeing the cosmos in this kind of creative, organic manner. Sorry. So if there are any questions, well, I guess maybe they're just a little bit shy. We could continue to talk, I guess.
Yeah, well, I really do hope for some dialogue this evening. But I see one coming in. Let's see, Blaine. Hey, Blaine.
Hey guys.
How's it going?
Blaine.
I'm really enjoying the conversation. It's very dynamic. And this is my first introduction to that idea of process philosophy, or what you guys are saying. But somehow I can relate to this because I'm a musician, and there's sort of like this etheric, unspoken language when it comes to creative musician, like improv musicians especially. I'm an improv musician with piano, and when you're playing with other people or you're playing by yourself and you're improvising, you're not drawing it from a place of a pattern that you know or that exists in that moment, but it does exist. It just doesn't exist. It's unique to that moment, right? And it's kind of like an etheric place that we draw this music from. And it's related to me about how you guys are talking about in that moment, all the moments prior to it exist within that choice. And in music, it's like it's kind of reflective of that nature. I hope I'm not unclear, but
I think that's absolutely the right association to draw with music. Improvisational music in particular, it's the perfect analogy for process metaphysics and the metaphysics of creativity. Another way of describing process metaphysics is to see nature as fundamentally rhythm, right? It's the patterns in nature are all about rhythm and resonance, and the complexity in nature is a series of sort of standing waves of resonant rhythms that just build on each other. And the ancients talked about the music of the spheres, and this is exactly what they were trying to convey. And we participate. The reason musical is so powerful is because it allows us to participate in these rhythms that are deeply meaningful, primordially meaningful, and totally non-linguistic at the same time, right?
I was thinking of, this is why I still think that jazz is almost cosmic, because, this interplay of sound is 100% a pure possibility at every second, because it's not going to be standard 4/4. It's gonna unfold as the rhythm unfolds. And what you have is at every moment, there's a new creation of a new possibility as each sound kind of rings out from the keyboards to the drums to the bass, even if there is a vocalist at the time as well, too. So that was great, Blaine. Thank you so much for your participation.
no problem. And honestly, it also draws a question of the reflection or the reflectivity of that choice, because I know, like, when I'm playing music sometimes, when I'm playing piano or even producing music, I will feel a drawing to a certain chord progression, or kind of like pulling to this or that. And is that really me creating, or is that me recognizing a creation that exists around me. And I think it may be a similar conversation, because that possibility always exists to play, this chord, but the possibility, when I reflect on the possibility, it opens up a whole new dialogue. And with the internet, and also just like now we can produce as many sounds as we want in many tracks. It wasn't always that way. So it's like that reflection, that reflectivity in music may be, I don't know what the word for it is, but may be kind of like considered in what you guys are talking about too. And namely the change that's that happens after that reflection. Because I feel like when I'm playing, and that's a lot of people, like you reflect on an idea, even if I'm not playing, but I'm watching the recording, will that affect the next way I see this here? Not even a mistake or a right or wrong viewpoint, but it's a consideration,
Yeah. Right or wrong is it brings in the question of morality and moral normativity, and one of the things that's interesting about Whitehead's cosmology and his metaphysics is when it comes to value, he actually gives preeminence to aesthetics over morality, because morality in any given moment in history is clearly relative, and we hope that we're doing better with each generation, but it's not necessarily a linear progression. And so for Whitehead, the source of value and the sense of good or bad really is an aesthetic thing. And so music becomes really the better source for like a sense of what's virtuous, not, and you don't have to take that literally, but in the sense of like you're meeting new people for the first time, and you want to be just be virtuous. Like it's like learning how to jazz with that group, and not add something creative, but not bring anyone down in the process. And so, like, if there's a moral challenge in the context of Whitehead's cosmology and vision of the universe, it's like, how do we make music together in a way that's maximally inclusive, but still leaves enough room for those who are clearly like the virtuosos who you want to let solo a little more often, but always with the aim of maximizing the diversity you can bring into harmony, right? That's Whitehead's definition of higher forms of beauty. It's all about maximizing the amount of diversity that you can bring into harmony. I see Dave has asked to chime in here. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot. I'm still a little new to this process. Speaking of which, I don't know Whitehead well enough, and Schelling even less well, but what I hear of his work reminds me, as a long-time contemplative, especially influenced by Buddhist practice, kind of sort of a poetry of what it's like to meditate. So my question, and feel free, Matt, to take it wherever you like, is how does process philosophy, how does Whitehead's perspective, how might it be translated to an experiential practice? Mm-hmm. What does this have by way, more than just a map of how things work, by way of a kind of guidance or suggestion or recommendations of what we are to practice, how we are to live?
Great question. Really great question.
Yeah, it really is. And not surprising from Dave. I really appreciate Dave's tweets about his meditation insights. I find them very valuable. Yeah, I would say that it's hard to do better in terms of a sort of both a soteriological application and the sort of practical application of a Whiteheadian metaphysics. It's hard to do better than what the many schools of Buddhism have already contributed to us. But I think there are also in many of the world's religions contemplative practices and forms of prayer that are kind of about self-emptying in different ways. And, there's Whitehead wasn't, his view of the relationship between God and the world and his sort of final interpretation of the nature of the universe and the human place within it is not Christian per se, but it's definitely more influenced by Christianity than any other tradition, although he admits in Process and Reality that, his metaphysics may strike most of his readers as more akin to different Vedic and Buddhist forms of thought than to your typical Christian or Western philosophical form of understanding. But I think there's something in Whitehead's metaphysics that speaks to the mystery of the incarnation and the way in which finitude itself is this, it's the experiential threshold required for there to be what the traditions have called divine love, agape. Like you don't know that agape is a possibility. You don't know that compassion in the selfless bodhisattvic form that would come through the Buddhist traditions. You don't know that it's possible until you've experienced suffering. It only has meaning as a response to suffering, and so I think in Whitehead's context, this incarnational mystery of the way in which, for whatever reason, the divine was driven to become finite and to experience death, that mystery has, I don't know that there could be anything that has more profound implications for how we experience our existence as human beings. Heidegger makes a big deal about finitude and being towards death, and you could also say that maybe you could call Whitehead a post-Christian, and Heidegger is also kind of post-Christian. I'm not a Heideggerian, so I don't want to make too many pronouncements about Heidegger, but in the sense that giving interpretation experientially and existentially to the meaning of incarnation, of this fact that at least in the traditions of the Bible, that God became flesh, the infinite incarnated, became finite and died, and that it's through that process that I think in our own human experience we can touch divine love, and without that we wouldn't know what love is. And so this isn't necessarily a meditative practice, but it's I think a profound experiential sense of what the existential results of living into a process metaphysics would look like, in terms of who each of us truly is and what our purpose on this planet is. If there is no substantial self, and if the extent that there is selfhood at all, it's always a function of our relationships to others. As Whitehead puts it, I love this line. He says that the present moment is constituted by the influx of the other. The present moment is constituted by the influx of the other. So he's not just a process philosopher. He's a process relational philosopher, and sometimes meditation can be caricatured as like, you seal yourself up in a quiet room and go inward into your own experience. But I'd love to hear Dave's thoughts on this. But it seems to me that there's also this profound presence of something else. It's not you anymore. There's something far more expansive present when you're meditating.
Well, what that immediately reminds me of is a favorite line in Zen teacher Dogen's Genjo Koan, where it's using Buddhist metaphysics, which are very process-like, in speaking of everything as dharmas, as events. But to translate that in pretty basic terms, to talk of dharmas or events as the things of the world what Dogen says is when we bring ourselves to bear on the things of the world, there's delusion. When the things of the world bring themselves to bear on us, there's awakening. And I'm reminded of those lines with your speaking of the influx of the other. And I'll just say that overall, as simplistic as it may sound, what I'm hearing in your presentation, which is just lovely, is that this material is sort of a map, not so much to explain what's real, but as to sort of invite us to look at and participate in what's real. So a kind of a song or poetry. And even if I don't understand all the particulars, I feel enriched by hearing about this material, and I'm grateful to you. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I love that.
I was just going to say something to Dave's comment about Schelling. So since you brought up Schelling, his late philosophy of revelation is linked. It's not just about Christianity. He has a philosophy of mythology, and there's a reason why he philosophizes about mythology, and I'll tell you this. His father was an Oriental scholar, and so at the time, the word Oriental didn't have this derogative term attached to it. He was studying ancient languages: Hebrew, Arabic, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and so Schelling has this great aspiration to understand the world's mythologies, and what he kind of captures from all of these mythologies is that every mythology from ancient Egypt to Persia to China, even in the Bhagavad Gita, there's always this contractive force, this expansive force, and then there's the attractive force of love. Just exactly what Matt was saying. But he doesn't. Of course he's a Christian, but he doesn't present one mythos over the other. What he wants to show is that these mythos served as content, conscious content, creative consciousness for the people. It was their way of expressivity. So if you think of the Greek festivals, they had festivals for everything. We don't have these festivals anymore, which is why we have such a lack in spirituality. We have so many people interested in learning about the occult and learning other things. But this was just a way of life. And Schelling is absolutely, so interested in understanding this like an assemblage of all of these mythos together in order to see a greater picture of content as it's unfolding. So I don't know how this may not be a meditative practice, but it may be an enlightening practice in the sense that it's not just going to be Eurocentric. Schelling was reading people like Kreutzer, and he actually went on some archaeological digs in Italy, which was crazy back then for a philosopher to do that. But it's this whole idea of appreciating the interconnections and the interwovenness of a lot of these mythos, and how a mythos has more. It's more than just a story. They're archetypes of expression that have been deeply embedded in all of us, that over time have been repressed, and may not be as free now. But a study of this mythos is a way of understanding this creative telos that's in all matter, or in all life. And that's all I wanted to say.
Nice. Thanks, Chris. Blaine, I see your hand. Can you still unmute yourself? Good.
Yeah. What you guys just said, especially with Dave talking about the meditative practice, it kind of, what was said after that, and kind of like what was discussed about the archetype of different forms of like thought process and stuff like that, it reminds me of the sort of dichotomy of some of the Eastern religions where they didn't have this relationship that most people in the West have now, where death is like viewed as this bad, horrible thing necessarily. At least some classes, and most like the priestly class and people generally understood and embraced death in a different way, from what I understand in some cultures, where especially like in the ancient Kemetic or Egyptian cultures and some Asian cultures, they wouldn't embrace death in a way that they necessarily wanted it, but some didn't view it as negative. Even further than that, some viewed it as not only, it wasn't like this inevitability only, it was more like a transformation. Like with Kali, the archetype of Kali, Ma, it was like a transformation. With what you guys are talking about, you guys talk about that love that transcends that kind of medium between the physical or matter and what's beyond the other. How do you guys think time and death fit into that, as far as, not necessarily culturally in these places, but kind of transcending that? What's the view or the vantage of time in that other, do you think? Or even death as a transformative piece, if it fits there?
I mean, big questions there. I appreciate that you're raising them, Blaine. I'd love to hear Chris talk about Schelling's book. It's a dialogue, Clara, on the spirit world's relationship to nature, I believe is the subtitle. And it's all about the role that the dead continue to play for the living. And, in some sense, I feel like Schelling thought that we can almost have maybe not more intimate, but a different kind of intimacy with our loved ones after they die, a kind of intimacy that we can't have while they're still alive. In the sense that souls are able to contact each other through the eternal, in a way that when we are embodied and in time, there's a bit more distance, a bit more confusion, a bit more lack of clarity. I think in a process metaphysics, though, when you bring it into phenomenological experience, right? What we experience moment to moment from Whitehead's point of view, we die in each moment and are born again in each moment. And so I think D.T. Suzuki has a riff on this in one of his chapters in his Zen Buddhism book, that is talking about reincarnation as not just kind of about past lives and future lives, but more so about the present and the way that each of us, as what we imagine to be individuals, is already a process of reincarnation from moment to moment to moment. And that also, the other human souls or human persons and all the other creatures in our present environment are always sort of resonating with us, and there are these vibratory transmissions flowing between our bodies all the time, and so we are all vibing with each other, right? But really, from moment to moment, as I was describing earlier, this entire cosmic environment is reverberating into who and what I am. My subjective immediacy is a growing together of that entire environment experiencing itself. And I, as a human person, because of the complexity of my body and organism and nervous system, right? Whitehead talks about the way the human body shelters what he calls a historical root of occasions of experience, which inherit from one another in an especially intimate way. Because, it's a phenomenological fact that most of us, if we're more or less healthy, have a sense of personal continuity in our consciousness from moment to moment, right? So even if on a mystical level, what Suzuki is saying, what Whitehead is saying is true, that, we die and are reborn in each moment, there's also this intimacy of inheritance, and that's what we call the soul, this personality, and it's forged over the course of a life, but it's fragile too. It's not, I think we have to say, for Whitehead, I don't know about Schelling, but for Whitehead, the soul is not eternal in the sense of being invulnerable to the influence of otherness. Like, we're changed, we're new in each moment. So there is a soul process metaphysics. It's not a substance, though. It's a kind of whirlpool, right? And so it's more of a dynamic relational process that if there is something like reincarnation between lives, I think there is something like that. I don't have a specific vision of the afterlife or the pre-life, but I think that there's more than just this particular incarnation. But I kind of think of it like reincarnation is more like soul clusters reincarnate, and so it's more of a group process and a collective process rather than this notion of individual souls reincarnating. I've always been confused with Buddhist notions of reincarnation if there's no self, and so I think maybe there's something like this going on in that context too. But yeah, it's one of the lessons of a process metaphysics is to really recognize the way in which death is always with us. Whether it's the moment-to-moment process of reincarnation as one moment arises and perishes and the next arises out of that and perishes, or it's the daily cycle of waking and sleeping. And each night we go to sleep and we disappear. Maybe we have some dreams and then we wake up in the morning again. It's a very mysterious process, right? And you can kind of see it as it's a fractal repetition happening at these different levels of existence, moment to moment, the day-night cycle, the life-death cycle. The point is, it's a cycle. What do you think, Chris?
Absolutely. Wow. I'm just thinking of this quote from the Stuttgart lectures, where Schelling says that even nature has this blanket of melancholia that is stretched over all of matter. And what he means, he doesn't mean that we're always in suffering. In a sense, we must always start off in darkness in order to reach the light. So, same thing that you were saying, that there's a kind of, as he was writing the Freedom Essay, his wife Caroline was dying, and disease and health play a pivotal role in the Freedom Essay, in the sense that they're not just two binary things, disease or death and life. They play this kind of, I don't want to say peekaboo game, but they're almost the same in a weird sense. Death is the beginning, and birth is the beginning, and they are interwoven in the sense that we the fall that Schelling's talking about isn't the fall from Adam and Eve. It's the fall is this fall that we have as individuals, the struggle that we have within this melancholia, that is somehow through love it's overcome. When you brought up the Clara dialogue, and I don't want to spend too much time on Schelling because we want to talk about process metaphysics, and I guess Schelling's in this. But it's funny because there's three potencies in the Clara dialogue. So there's three powers, three speakers. The first speaker is a scientist, an empiricist. And he has a very kind of dogmatic, brute, materialist way of viewing the cosmos. But he can never really amount to any answers. And then there's a priest who's the spirit. And in a sense, the priest is caught up in his own dogmatism of his doctrine, and yet he can't get away. And it's so funny that Clara, this beautiful interiority, this personality, is a combination of both spirit and matter, and fused together. All of them fused together, not just it. And by fusing them together, I don't mean like a synthesis. I mean each are individuated, and each are part of the one in this harmony, and always will be a part of this discord and concord back and forth. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for that sort of. It's not a you don't give anything away in the story because you just talked about the sort of metaphysical substructure of this dialogue. It's really beautifully written as a sort of fictional account, but it's clearly has a philosophical purpose underlying it, to give expression to these potencies. And thanks for sharing that, Chris. I see Rami is hoping to chime in. Let me...
Actually, It's funny. Rami is a very good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
He's did his graduate degree at Brock University in St. Catharines, and he's an author himself. He's written many fictional texts. That are, not oddly, but they're very funny, comedic. And they're mixed with philosophy and existentialism, and Rami really knows his Nietzsche. So it'll be interesting to hear what Rami has to say. Go ahead, Rami. Sorry.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I'm actually working on my 8th book right now. It's my first one of non-fiction philosophy. It's very existential. I hope I can get to the end of it and actually publish it as a full-length book. But this is really interesting stuff, dealing with all these different matters. According to Einstein's block universe theory, also known as eternalism, it states that the past, present, and future exist simultaneously at all times in what could be deemed an eternal now of space-time. They've since proven that theory of his empirically using light. And that means everyone who has passed on from this world is still alive, and all the people who haven't been born yet are already dead. But that's certainly not to say that that has to be just in and of itself either scary or enlightening. What scares me is that all my past and future mistakes and stupidities and humiliations exist forevermore, and like an eternal replay for all of space-time, whatever that means, because it's hard to really think of these terms with our rational minds. And so do all the wrongs that have ever been done against me. But it's just an interesting a way to look at things when speaking of our own existential existence and what it means within the cosmos. Because so basically, it's that time does not pass. It's actually we who pass through time, experiencing it subjectively, as we do so, with the past, present, and future all being equally real and equally illusory. So though there is no eternal recurrence, also translated as eternal return, as Nietzsche's Zarathustra postulated, and as Nietzsche's experimental imaginary demon in the gay science offers you as you lie in bed, there is also there is what seems to be an eternal occurrence of all instances, no matter how big or small, happening somewhere every moment in the 4 dimensions of the space-time block that is the universe, time being the 4th dimension. So not only do things happen for no reason, and just to be clear, that's not to say without cause, they are always happening at all times for no reason. So Heraclitus was therefore wrong about everything always changing and being in a state of flux, for that is also an illusion. And shockingly, Parmenides was right. Nothing changes. Everything simply is at all times at some coordinate of the 4-dimensional space-time block, making Jean-Paul Sartre's conclusion in his fabulous and monumental 1938 masterpiece of a novel, Nausea, that the past does not exist, completely and utterly incorrect. For even if we have forgotten the past completely, it still lives on, unchanging and undying in space-time. So the only way the statement, the past does not exist, works is if what is meant is that there is no past and never has been one. It's just an illusion of our subjectivity. So we can never say that a given fuck-up or bad experience is in the past and that it's over and gone, for the past is now, and horrifically, it always will be, in some sense. But herein lies a paradox. For Heraclitus was also right. You can't walk into the same river twice. It's true. A person cannot do that. The exact same river and the exact same moment that I walk into it may exist at all times forevermore, but I, as I know myself, cannot do that. For the river within the realm of my subjectivity has changed in the now that I know it. And that's something I can't deny. So if both Heraclitus and Parmenides are, and always will be correct, then it's Plato, whose philosophy combines the two, who is most correct of all. There's an apparent world of change, and there's another one which is unchanging. However, that other world is not the world of ideas, which he postulated as a realm of perfect essences of everything that exists in the apparent world, but rather the apparent world and essential world are both equally real and one and the same, both changing and unchanging, like the equally so, and that is the paradox of being a conscious being in a block universe of space-time. For even if yesterday still exists eternally and tomorrow always has as well, I am a now that passes through them, experiencing myself changing as I do so, even though the past me still exists along with every single future one. It's therefore conscious experience that allows for the existence of change, though it be subjective, that is based on the conscious subject, and without it, all would be static. Yeah, you see, that's how I've and on the bright side, it isn't just our bad experiences that are eternal. Our joyful ones, the moments we wish would last forever, are just as eternal. The first time you went to an amusement park, or on a roller coaster, or on your best vacation trip, your first incredible kiss, your first exuberant bout of laughter, the first time you swam in the ocean, the first time you got high, whatever it is. Those are forever as well at some coordinate in the space-time block.
Wow, that was that was a lot. Thank you, Rami. Matt, do you want to respond to that, or
Sure.
do you agree or disagree?
Oh, well, Rami, it was a wonderful sort of unpacking of the implications of the Einsteinian block universe for our human existence. I completely disagree with you, however, and I think that the best way to understand, in essence, what process metaphysics is suggesting is that the block universe is not, in fact, you said it was empirically proven. Obviously, Einstein's theory of general relativity is very well empirically has been verified repeatedly through different tests and phenomena that have been measured, but it's a theoretical interpretation. Even some would say that Einstein's own theory doesn't necessarily imply a block universe, though it's one of the more easily metaphysical positions extracted from special and general relativity. But there are other ways of theoretically interpreting the data. And I mentioned Whitehead's book, Principle of Relativity. He offers an empirically equivalent alternative rendering of relativity theory, which does not presuppose the idea of curved space or the idea of a deterministic future or a space-time block. The idea of process is that the past and the future are in fact ontologically distinct in the sense that the past has already occurred, it's already actualized. The future has not yet occurred and remains potential. It's the future is possible, the past is actual, the present is the meeting place of the two, and yeah, in some sense, the present is eternal. We're never not in the present, right? Nonetheless, nature very clearly appears to be a process of a creative process that is accruing value and complexity over time. And so while the present is eternal, nonetheless, nature is process, and the future is open-ended. And there's, we could have a great conversation about this. Whitehead and Einstein actually met in 1922 and tried to work through their philosophical differences. Whitehead definitely was thrilled with Einstein's physical theory. He disagreed with Einstein's philosophical interpretation. And so I guess the important point I would want to make is that the block universe is a philosophical interpretation of the science. There are other philosophical interpretations of the science, and Whitehead is offering us an alternative rendering of physics, 20th century physics, that absolutely does not accept the block universe ontology, and instead sees each moment as creatively emerging from the past and helping to realize an as yet unrealized future, right? And so for Whitehead, potentiality is a real feature of reality, right? This isn't a deterministic universe. It is an open-ended creative process. That's the Whiteheadian wager, at least. We could certainly talk more about that, but I definitely want to push back against the idea that somehow the block universe as a metaphysical interpretation of relativity has been empirically proven. That's just not the case.
Well, they say they've proved it using light. In terms of like Einstein, how he himself saw it, that there's this story of he had this very close friend, and his friend died, and he wrote a letter to his friend's wife saying that he believes his friend is still alive. At some point and in space time, that in a way we're all both dead, and then we remain alive after we die. So in terms of how I understand what you're saying, like Weinstein, Whitehead disagreeing with that. But in terms of like how Einstein, like he himself saw it, he had his strong convictions that seem to have been upheld since then by modern physics. So it interests me that you're saying that now that's been debunked now. But I'd be interested in seeing the findings themselves and how that happened, because I don't know, as far as the research I've been doing, the modern physics has accepted accepted eternalism as just a fact, pretty much. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah, I think it might be maybe 55 or 60% of physicists. I'm not making up the numbers here, but it seems that it's the majority opinion that time isn't a feature of nature, objectively speaking, but is somehow a perceptual addition that human consciousness brings. But there are plenty of physicists who completely disagree with that. I mean, check out Lee Smolin's work, or Carlo Rovelli, or so it's debatable. I wouldn't say I'm trying to debunk the block universe. I think it's false, but I'm not debunking. I'm just saying it's debatable, and plenty of people who understand physics better than I do would tell you that the block universe is not established science. It's a philosophical position attempting to interpret science.
And do the ones who deny it as fact also deny time as a fourth dimension?
Well, let's look at it this way. I think one way of attempting to measure time would be to consider it to be a fourth dimensional of a Riemannian manifold. But as philosophers like Bergson were among the first to point out, again, directly to Einstein at a very public, famous debate in Paris in 1922, Bergson pointed out that measured time, clock time, does not exhaust the concrete nature of time. That there's something more to time than what can be measured, because after all, the clocks themselves are also aging, right? So time transcends the clocks. Time transcends measurement. Time cannot be spatialized. I'm channeling Bergson here, and to a large extent, Whitehead agrees with Bergson that there's more to time than what can be captured by the variable t in Newton's or Einstein's equations.
And Lee Smolin also brings up Bergson in his text on time, which you brought up, which you recommended to Rami. I also recommend that to you too, Rami, as well. Lee Smolin has a fantastic book on time where he kind of is doing what, as Matt said, he's kind of critiquing this understanding of the cosmos.
I see Blaine.
Definitely look into it for sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat more about this, Rami. A very interesting subject that I've written a lot about and like to think about and dialogue about with folks. So not trying to shut down conversation about it, but I see Blaine has his hand up. And I think someone else was asking to speak earlier, but Blaine, you go ahead. And if that other person, was it Steven maybe? But Blaine, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that both perspectives aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Like both context. All the ones like on the left, one might be on the right. It's still like the text of the Hermetica. They talk about which is like Jehudi or Thoth. He explores this idea of imagine yourself as not being born yet, living, and in your grave. And he kind of explores this idea, like you were saying, Ramy, about this different paradigms and context and time. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just that. It's like me making a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and I leave it on the counter, and it molds. And then I go back and say, well, that's like, maybe like, and there's also a possibility where I would have eaten the sandwich, and there's a possibility where I let it mold. But the fact that I let it mold, I might still eat it. So like, there's all those different decisions aren't based on the fact that it molded. They're based on my decision. So like, so their decision is actually what creates, in my perspective, the opportunity of time. Like, because time has different paradigms. Like, I think it may exist in 4 dimensions, but who says it doesn't exist in infinite dimensions beyond that? And because we're in a physical or localized being, like our vehicle, like our body, which is not necessarily localized, but that's what we perceive it. Then we might say, okay, well, time is this. But I have to agree on the other side that likely it's not just that. Not saying it isn't that in some place. I might share this amount of genetics with an elephant, but there's a big difference between me and an elephant. So like, I think there's a lot to be uncovered there. Not doing what's right or wrong, but just say I would say there's a lot to be left uncovered and a lot to be explored there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the relevance of a consciousness within the matter of myself. Actually, that's absolutely true. I mean, the matter of consciousness changes everything. I mean, let's say hypothetically, everyone agreed hypothetically that the block universe theory was true. That still wouldn't necessarily mean that my consciousness, as it is right now, as I'm talking to you, as I'm experiencing now, also exists in that exact same way at every instance throughout the space-time block, throughout the coordinates, through it. It could be that it's just like a matter and energy existing throughout it eternally, but that my consciousness, this consciousness right here, only exists the way it is right now and at no other place throughout it. So yes, I believe that consciousness in itself adds another dimension to the discussion.
Interesting. Stephen, I want to hear from you. What do you think?
Hi, Matt and Christopher. I hope you're both doing well. Good to hear from you. Good to hear Ramy giving you a good run for your money this evening.
Is that what I was doing? I didn't realize that I was doing that.
Well, I think you're both doing really well. I was going to raise a slightly different angle as well. Matt earlier mentioned the word resonance, and I was thinking about memory and how memory fits into, I guess it would be concrescence, the death and birth cycle, and whether we could draw on Rupert Sheldrake's resonance, morphic resonance. I'm just wondering, because presumably memory is something which is underneath psyche in Whitehead's general picture. It's not contingent on psyche necessarily, and so I guess we're thinking of it as a kind of resonance, something like a wave. I don't know if there's anything there that you'd like to respond to. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think memory as a form of morphic resonance, as Sheldrake would put it, is very resonant with Whitehead's point of view, and indeed Sheldrake was influenced by Whitehead. But yeah, memory is kind of the presence of the past, right? It's the way that we inherit what has occurred, what has already been actualized, and this connects with the point I was making earlier, sort of in opposition to the block universe ontology, is that there's this, process metaphysics. There's a sort of polar tension between the past and the future. The past is about memory, right? The future is about anticipation, and it's the present is the tension held in the midst of the inherited memories and the future anticipations. And I think I'm sorry, Stephen, I'm kind of turning your question into a response to Ramy again, but I think I'm still thinking through what he was bringing to the table about Einstein and whatnot. And to me, it's like, the block universe is such a great example of the bifurcation of nature, right? Because human consciousness ends up being given a really special place in the block universe as the source of all time, right? And I think that's not right. I think that human consciousness is just one special example of a more generic form of experience present throughout nature. And experience, again, right, is this tension between the inheritance of the past, memory, and the anticipation of the future, right, which is the capacity we have to make decisions, to realize different possibilities that are arrayed before us in each moment. Every occasion of experience, every event, let's say, in the universe is making a decision. And one of the other problems with the block universe interpretation is that it doesn't factor in quantum theory at all. It's a fully relativistic understanding of the universe. Famously, for the last 100 years plus, the problem has been that these two very successful, accurate, robust theoretical perspectives in physics, quantum and relativity theories, they don't fit together. They describe two completely different universes. Whitehead is more on the side of thinkers like, Carlo Rovelli, who I mentioned, who think that really we need to... Quantum physics is more foundational than relativity physics, and what we need to do is find a way for space-time to be an emergent phenomenon that comes out of quantum events and quantum relationality in one way or another. That's where Whitehead would probably, if he were alive today, he'd probably be in that school of thought, where a quantum event, one interpretation of what's going on at the quantum level is that there are these decisions being made where, let's say Schrodinger's wave function is a description of what a moment of quantum experience is, where there's a field of possibilities that opens up, and we can't know in advance how an electron will decide to advance from one moment to the next. We have some pretty precise understanding of the field of probability that is available to it to realize. It's not like the future is just totally wide open. There are definite possibilities that are way more likely than other possibilities. But nonetheless, there seems to be room at the quantum level for something like a decision to occur where potentialities become actualized. There's no room for potentiality in a relativistic ontology. But quantum theory, it's just all about potentiality, right? And so, Stephen, you kind of cued me with bringing up memory, just to think about experience in this way as this polar tension between memory and anticipation. And that all goes out the window in the block universe.
Matt, if you're not finished, I'll let you finish. But we have a question from a friend of ours, a friend of wisdom, actually. But I wanted to address everyone here for a second. If you have a question and you maybe don't want to, speak, you can DM me and I'll ask the question for you, or you can send it to Matt later if you'd like, if that works. But Dominique has a question, unless you were about to, if you were still saying something, or if I interrupted Stephen, actually.
No, it was just happy to have a dialogue and jumping off points. It's all great. Go ahead, please, Christopher.
But Stephen, now that you're still a speaker, if something comes up through the discussion, please, jump in if you really, same with Ramy, same with everyone else that's been speaking as well too. Dominique, go right ahead. Shoot your question.
Is Dominic able to unmute? I don't know if Dominic requested speaking privileges or not.
I can't even see her in the chat, actually. But if we can't, I have her question.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and share it?
Oh, I can't speak. She says, I'm wondering how Whitehead and or Schelling understand or think of art, like a painting or film.
Well, I think Schelling, in his philosophy of art lectures, basically says that art is the attempt to give finite representation to the infinite or something like that, right?
Yep.
And for Whitehead, art, I think he would fully accept that sort of a quick definition, but art for Whitehead has a cosmological function. He says that the human being is itself a product of the artistic expression of nature. And then once the human has been created by this evolutionary process, we then, as conscious organisms, are the creature which begins to transform nature itself into art. And there's a deeply romantic strain in Whitehead, and there are ways in which this process of transforming nature into art can definitely go wrong. I think industrial growth society, techno-industrial civilization, is a good example of what happens when a kind of art, more, the technological form of artificial art, if you will, sort of goes wrong, and we transform nature into plastic and a bunch of junk. But there's another way of engaging with the artistic process, which, for Whitehead, just positioning yourself so as to best perceive a sunset is already a form of artistry. He has some beautiful poetic lines about one of the first flowers to emerge. I don't think they knew the exact timeline in the 1920s, but I think flowers only emerged in the Cenozoic era, so we're talking 60, 50 million years ago. Flowering plants emerged, and Whitehead says that when the first flower emerged, even though there were no animals with eyes sophisticated and complex enough to really appreciate it, it was nonetheless a work of art. It was a thing of beauty that was realizing value to a degree that had never theretofore been realized. And the role of the human being is to continue that process in an intensified form. So art is in some ways the point. It's the whole point of our being here.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, just to respond to Dominique. By the way, Dominique, there should be like a little heart function, and or you could just hit your mic, and that will request to Matt and myself to unmute you. But there's a point in Schelling's system of transcendental idealism where he's talking about the primordial link between the subject and the object, these poles. Now, Schelling doesn't really believe in a subject-object connection. He thinks that they kind of come together through an experience, through like a relational experience. And he says something happens that there's nothing other. An experience like looking at a work of art, like a painting, would be the best example of this not a blurring of subject and object poles, but of one kind of event, one moment where you're kind of enmeshed in the painting. And I'm thinking the Art Gallery of Ontario had one of Van Gogh's Starry Nights, and I had never seen a Van Gogh painting in my life ever. And they had this kind of white light on the bottom of it, so it looked like it was 3D. And I'd come around the corner, and I must have scared everybody in the AGO because I kind of like screamed, like not screamed, but like when I saw it. And it was that very surreal moment that it was just it wasn't the fact that I became the object became me, but there was this moment of being within this space, this copulative space that was one kind of multiple moment. Anyways, I'm sorry if that didn't make any sense. I apologize.
No, I mean, I think we've metaphysics is always at the edge of sense and nonsense, right? So I love what you were saying there. I think John wanted to chime in, but before you do, John, I want to share. I have Whitehead's Adventures of Ideas handy, and I just want to share a few lines about art for Dominique here. And this is 269, page 269, towards the end of Adventures of Ideas. Whitehead says, art neglects the safety of the future for the gain of the present. In so doing, it is apt to render its beauty thin. But after all, there must be some immediate harvest. The good of the universe cannot lie in indefinite postponement. The day of judgment is an important notion, but that day is always with us. Thus, art takes care of the immediate fruition, here and now, and in so doing is apt to lose some depth by reason of the immediate fruition at which it is aiming. Its business is to render the day of judgment a success, now. The effect of the present on the future is the business of morals. And yet the separation between morals and art is not so easy. He goes on. The point, is that the artistic endeavor is one which is trying to produce the day of judgment now, right? So that we can behold the cosmos, the beautiful adornment, the ordered harmony of this place within which we exist, and declare it good and beautiful and true. That's ultimately the aim of art. And you could say that in our decadent phase of late capitalism, that art has lost its connection to the good and the true, right? We have art for art's sake. And, I have experienced great, beautiful works of art in modern art museums, but I think there's a way in which Whitehead and Schelling would want to valorize the holiness of art and the, not just the holiness, but the truth of art, right? And with the modern and postmodern zeitgeist that we're in, there's a way in which these value spheres have become too disconnected, so that art has been severed from its connection to science or the true, and from religion or the good, and that true art, good art, would be, in fact, inseparable from these other domains or spheres of human value. With that, why don't we see what John has to add? Unless, Chris, you wanted to reflect on any of that.
No.
Okay.
That was wonderful. Yeah, no.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, thanks. Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Yeah, great. Thanks for hosting this thing. It's really great to be able to see it on Twitter and to jump in. I really enjoy this topic. I think there's I just wanted to, I was motivated to say something when you were talking about physics. There's quantum mechanics, but there's also relativity. There's the quantizing of relativity with kind of quantum gravity. But there's another interesting thing, which is to gravitize quantum mechanics. And the person who seems to be quite prominent in doing that is Roger Penrose. The interesting thing about Roger Penrose is that he's written quite a lot of papers with a guy called Stuart Hameroff that have got Whitehead all over them. And the interesting thing about all that is, Penrose says that the person who had the most plausible interpretation of Schrödinger's equation was David Bohm, with his pilot wave theory. If you leave the equations alone, so if you just run with the equations and just take them at face value, then Bohm's in Penrose's view, the most best has got the best sort of interpretation of that. the Copenhagen interpretation, and there's another one as well, being the other two main ones. Interesting thing about Bohm is that him and his mate, he had a mate, Hillius or somebody.
Basil Hiley.
Sorry?
Basil Hiley, I believe, is who you're thinking of?
I'm not sure if it's him. I should remember these names, but I just forget sometimes. They were both pretty committed Whiteheadians, and there's a talk on YouTube by Penrose. Penrose was at Birkbeck College in London in the 50s with David Bohm, and he says that they met every week and talked about, physics and philosophical issues. So David Bohm's like quite strongly into Whitehead and seemed quite influenced by that. And I think that's where Penrose picked up an interest in Whitehead scheme. It's just that if you look at this consciousness stuff that he's done with Haroff, there's this orchestrated objective reduction, but the objective reduction thing is quite interesting. It's very Whiteheadian. Mm-hmm. It presupposes this. I mean, I'm reluctant to go into the full technicalities of it, but it presupposes a region of space-time and has this decision which is reached in presupposing a region of space-time, because if there's a superposition of the two possibilities, and if you look at it from a relativity point of view, so if you gravitize the quantum mechanics, you end up with you've got this block universe thing, but the probabilities should sum to 1. So if you say it's half a chance it's going down one path, half a chance it's going down the other path, and then boof, there's a decision that's made and it's here and not there. But before that, it's in this quantum state where it could be one or the other. If you look at that from one branch, then and draw a line and an angle, there's a point at which it could well be in some place, but it's definitely not in the other place. And if it's going to be in the other place, and you draw the line on a sloping going down the other way, and it's definitely at that other place because a decision's been made, but it's also still possibly in the other place. In other words, the probabilities from one side is less than naught and the other side is greater than naught, so it can't possibly work like that. That's how the quantum mechanics theory starts to sort of break down. And so Penrose has this thing where you have to sort of trace it back, kind of Stalin's photographs, where you actually go back in time and start editing the photographs of history. And it kind of looks like the decision's been made at the beginning, but it can't have been because it's made later. And so the conclusion is that it's the region of space-time which is presupposed by the decision, which happens later, which is a really interesting thing. And it's almost exactly what Whitehead describes in Process and Reality about this quantum being, like a presupposition of the entire region. And it's just a kind of stark similarity. The other thing that Penrose talks about is, in terms of like putting space-time in its place as an emergent phenomenon, he talks about the cohomologies of two things. The common example is the pair of photons or something that's entangled. So you've got this quantum entanglement, and if you measure one thing, then it measure the other thing, then there's a correspondence, a probabilistic correspondence, which was a big kind of controversial discussion, with Einstein insisting that there was these things called local hidden variables. And many decades later, there was a guy called Stuart Bell, I think he's called Stuart. Anyway, Bell's experiment proved that the hidden variables were global, and that this decision that takes place across space-time. So Penrose's tribar, this impossible triangle, tries to capture in a geometric, in a sort of graphical, tries to illustrate the mathematical structure of cohomology, which is that although various functions can be valid locally, if you put them all together, it becomes impossible. And so it's Penrose gives the simple example of an electron or a photon going through propagating as a wave and hitting a detector in one point, and it instantaneously doesn't appear anywhere else. So that he gives that as the simplest example that he can think of the same cohomology. So there's an event which takes place, which is that this, the electron as a wave, or the particle as a wave, then collapses to be something at a particular point in space-time. But in its collapsing, it collapses across space-time in a way that means that thing is, that everywhere else in space-time instantaneously knows not to, exhibit this particle appearing there, which is quite odd, really, if you think about, information only propagating at the speed of light. How can it be that if it appears over there, then everywhere else knows not to have an electron or a photon or whatever it is appearing on the detector? It's quite a strange thing. And so you have this this event, this decision, this thing that happening, through space-time in a way that is quite surprising. But anyway, I just thought that was all very interesting. The gravitization of quantum mechanics, as well as the quantizing of relativity, pointing towards something else happening that's neither relativity or quantum mechanics. You've got two things. You're trying to push into a corner along two walls, both of which aren't really straight, and so you're not going to get into that corner by putting those two things together. There needs to be a kind of imaginative leap into something else. And I thought Penrose did quite an interesting job of speculating on what, how it might really work, and that he came up with this scheme which is just remarkably coincident with what Whitehead described in Process from Reality. Anyway, I just thought I'd chip all that in. The other thing I wanted to say is there's some subtitle on this: Process Metaphysics, Physics, Biology, Environmentalism. And we talk about art in these discussions quite a lot, and science. But there's another aspect to it, really, which is design and decisions. I mean, in terms of human experiences, which is where Whitehead's scheme necessarily starts and perhaps necessarily ends for us, human beings. We make decisions, we design things. We design experiments, we, invent, we make art and so on. But we continuously design and condition the conditions which condition us. And that process of design and having a truly modern... I do software for a living. And software is characterized by this substance. The design approach is up to something called event sourcing and event storing, largely characterized by the substance quality categories. And if you trace it back, you can see that the philosophy which people like Grady Booch and whatnot were using to kind of mobilize these seminal and pervasive, very common approaches was classical thought. And I've discussed this with these people, and it turns out that the softwares have kind of let's say a rather advanced case of science and technology in the modern world, yet the concepts which are applied to it are, let's say, if Whitehead's process philosophy is modern process philosophy, the concepts aren't up to date with modern philosophy. And so, but generally speaking, I think this is a kind of design approach which involves feelings, which we can fold in a kind of psychological thing, the process psychology of Carl Rogers and perhaps Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent or collaborative or life-serving communication stuff, and bring in a kind of more collective or more thoughtful or more intensely felt, and therefore, an approach which therefore leads to deeper satisfactions than the design approaches which we can get with the prevailing commonsensical approaches to things, which leave us several degrees of abstraction away from, what we could get to, with a more direct connection to the ways in which things happen, which is that many feelings grow together in a creative process of becoming to make a decision, and to associate that with a design approach which encompasses technology and human experience and your relation with yourself and your relation with other people, and how that's conditioned with various technical and artifacts like software and computers and buildings and all that stuff. I think it's a really interesting line of development, which I'd love to connect with more people about.
Yeah,
anyway.
super important point you're bringing up, John. And you were reminding me in terms of the design and sort of programming implications of a process relational ontology. I was reminded of Christopher Alexander. He's an architect, but he's very influential among programmers, as I understand, for his pattern language, and wants to bring human experience back into our understanding of not only architecture but just design in general. And if algorithms are going and AI is going to become an increasingly pervasive feature of our world, we certainly want those computations to be running in a pattern language that is process relational and not substance quality based, because reality, maybe our many of our languages in the the language group that I'm trying to think of is escaping me at the moment, but the language groups that have subject predicate kind of grammar that lends itself to a substance property ontology. If we program that into the machines that are going to be making decisions and trying to understand the world well enough to make good decisions, they might not be able to do it very well. And, so...
You mean object-oriented programming?
That's not what I was thinking of, but...
Okay.
Yeah. But also your earlier point about Penrose and the gravitationalizing of quantum theory, I think I maybe was a little bit too one-sided earlier in saying that, it's the quantum that's foundational and relativity needs to be seen to emerge out of that. I think, Whitehead has these two modes of analysis in his mature metaphysics, what he calls coordinate analysis, or morphological analysis, which is more like relativity in terms of measuring space-time and whatnot. And then he has genetic analysis, which is it's more like about quantum discontinuity, and that's his analysis of concrescence. And so, he's not trying to fully swallow the one with the other. They're both important modes of analysis. So I appreciate that you're bringing more balance to that.
Matt, I just wanted to, stop you. I just wanted to jump in and ask how much, it's 10 o'clock, it's almost 10 o'clock here in Toronto. I don't know how much more time you like, so I was just wondering, would you like another half an hour more? Would you like to wrap it up soon, or how
I do actually need to wrap it up soon, maybe the top of the hour, actually, so I can go have dinner. I'm in Pacific time zone here, so I'm getting pretty hungry. But
it's 3 a.m. here. I should really be in bed.
Jeez.
Enjoying the discussion.
Thanks for staying up with us.
It's 11:53 a.m. here in Tokyo, so I'm perfectly comfortable.
So if you want to give like a time, because we can always extend this to next week or another week. We can do a part 2 for your second space, and we can continue the discussion, or we can keep going. It's up to you completely. I'm just here to mediate everything.
I think we should wrap it up pretty soon here. I'm just realizing that Dan had wanted to chime in earlier. Dan, do you want maybe not the very last word, but final sort of topic or comment or question to throw into the mix?
Hey, Matt. Yeah. First, happy birthday.
Thank you.
If Twitter got it right.
It was yesterday, actually.
It was yesterday? Oh, shit. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm Team Process. And I came to process through theology. So I'm always, and I've been engaged with your work via your blog for a number of years now. And I get most excited when you are lured into theology and spirituality. And I'd like you to speak.
You're cutting out, Dan. I don't know if that's just for me.
Yeah, Dan, if you can hear me right now, can you rephrase what you're saying, because you've completely broken up for a bit?
Okay,
or repeat what your question was. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Anyway, I'll keep it short. I want you to talk about love again, and my question would be, if you think that love is an emergent property that arose, parallel to human beings, or if it's something that's, I don't know, kind of like creativity, how it's manifested, or that it's actualized in every event of becoming.
Oh boy, that's a juicy one. I mean, the simple answer would be no, I don't think it just emerged with human beings. I think we, as human beings, emerged because of love. We wouldn't be here without it. And in Whitehead's way of thinking about this cosmologically, there is an ordered cosmos only because of divine love, in the sense that, and so this isn't a typical, sort of cosmological argument for the existence of God. Whitehead doesn't think that we can prove the existence of God logically, right? But it's more of a, I think it's a form of empirical abduction in a Peircean sense, that given that we observe a universe of such great order, the question naturally arises, well, where did the order come from? And in Whitehead's view, this sort of a question metaphysically is really a question of how did this actual universe emerge out of the infinite possibilities which could have been? Because there are way more possibilities of a chaotic sort of universe than for an ordered universe. Although Whitehead says even to call it a universe or a world is already to presuppose some degree of order. But let's just say, for Whitehead, maybe the best analogy here is to think of what why Aristotle was led to develop a theology, developing this notion of an unmoved mover. He needed an explanation for motion, right? And Whitehead says, our physics is advanced. We don't have the same problem that Aristotle needed to solve by conceptualizing a God as an unmoved mover. But Whitehead says there's an analogous problem in 20th century physics, which is, you could frame it as the question, how does something actual emerge out of the possible? And Whitehead's answer is, I think, he says it's the primordial nature of God, which ultimately is this divine eros or divine love that gives some character to infinite possibility, such that a universe can emerge sort of in response to that initial conditioning, right, provided by divine love, that where there was just pure possibility with no vector, no valence toward the good or the true or the beautiful, God's role is, and Whitehead admits this is totally irrational. It's the ground of reason, but not itself rational. That there was this primordial act of love where God envisaged the infinite realm of possibilities, or in Whitehead's lingo, eternal objects, and gave them some tilt in a direction, right? And while that tilt doesn't determine how the rest of the universe evolves and unfolds and organizes itself, it does provide a lure, right? And so this divine eros, as you were saying, it repeats in each creature, and as a kind of Whitehead will say that God's role in the evolution of the universe is to hold up a mirror to each creature to reflect back to that creature its own greatness, right? So as if to say to the creature, this is what you could be, right? And that divine whisper functions as a lure that each creature can decide to realize or not. It's not determined, right? God's not all-powerful, but nonetheless has this capacity for erotically luring creatures toward what is most beautiful. And I think that lure is love. And we could bring in Schelling here and talk about how human beings are not only lured by this love, but have a capacity, I don't want to say have a capacity, but rather are the capacity for freedom. And it's in human beings that this thing called evil all of a sudden rears its head and drives us crazy. But it's a function of our freedom to choose love or not. And the fact that we are conscious and aware of this decision puts us in perhaps a unique situation among other animals on this planet. I'm not sure, but it does seem like evil is a uniquely human problem, and it follows from our freedom. While love is present throughout the universe, it's the human that has to realize this freely, right? What do you think, Chris? You want to add anything to this?
I thought what you said was fantastic. Yeah, I agree with you that love for Schelling is more of it's the creative principle. It's the attractive force. I don't think he would ever use the word lure as a total Whiteheadian thing, but he would say things that it attracts, it brings inward. It's a kind of and like you said, evil for Schelling, it's not like a moral evil. It's when we move away from ourselves to the periphery, or we become absolute craving, absolute contraction in ourself. We don't see any others. We all we see is this kind of blind desiring, as opposed to a centered self that can be a part of this kind of harmonious arrangement. I think that's what he would say. And he says at the end of the Freedom Essay that love is higher than spirit, that love rises higher than spirit. And at the end of the Freedom Essay, Schelling says that the ground of God evaporates, turns into spirit. Spirit is then allocated to individual beings, all individual beings. And what we're left with is this der nie aufgehende Rest, like this irreducible remainder, this dark ground of spirit, this kind of creative tension that's always, pushing and pulling and always enveloping us in life.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, it's probably the best note to end on. Thank you, Chris. I would love to do this again, perhaps next weekend. This has been a lot of fun.
No, I want to thank you for coming here, and it's been fantastic. And everyone that's participated, we both Matt and I thank you for participating. And if Matt is free and I'm free next weekend, we can continue the conversation along the lines of process metaphysics. I'm also learning. I'm not an expert in process metaphysics. So I'm also learning a lot of stuff too, and struggling with the material and hearing and enjoying this. So, Matt, if you have anything else to say, you can end the space and go eat dinner.
Well, I mean, this is what I live for is dialogue, and I really appreciate everyone's comments. It's great to explore these deep wells together, and let's keep doing it. So look for the notification or the tweet from me or Chris about the next one of these. And Chris, it doesn't have to be process metaphysics. We could do a little Schellengian abyssal splunking or something like that, if you prefer. I would love that.
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking maybe next time we do this, we can talk about like kind of dynamic thought, like all thought in regards to, because I know environmentalism is really important to you and to me. Maybe we can talk about how philosophy has a bigger role in this in our part with ecology and environmentalism. I don't know. That's just an idea.
I love it. I love it. All right. So we have that to look forward to. And Chris, have a great night, everyone.
You too.
Happy Sunday.
All right. Bye-bye, guys. Everybody.